by way of a little bit more introduction, I describe myself as a journalist and activist. I've been studying and writing about Social Security, and specifically the politics of Social Security, for probably more than 15 years now. And the politics of it really fascinates me, or it always has, because I find it so strange that a program like Social Security should be under such constant attack. 30 plus years of incessant attacks from the right and the center right. And what's that all about, and what's the dynamic of it, is really what I tried to do in my book. So I guess just by way of, I wanted to start out by kind of giving the lay of the land a bit. Maybe some of this is familiar in terms of what's going on politically now. We've just come through yet another series of budgetary crises centered on the deficit crisis, which is a crisis that basically exists only in the minds of people in the village, otherwise known as Washington, and certain parts of the financial services industry. But yet it dominates the headlines, and it dominates what's going on even during the economic crisis that we're in now. The crisis over budget and the debt ceiling that just concluded left President Obama being heralded as the victor. But in fact, the conversation on Capitol Hill hasn't changed at all. It's still about the deficit, the national debt, tax reform, so-called tax reform, which basically means finding new ways to lower the tax burden on the rich and property, not about jobs or building the real economy, building a more robust real economy. Paul Ryan lately has made it very clear that the Republicans see the sequester, which is still going on, as their big bargaining chip in the budget committee, the talks that are going on now between the House and the Senate. Instead of trying to again defund Obamacare in the conference committee, what they're going to do is make entitlement reform the quid pro quo for renegotiating the sequester. Now you notice that I didn't say getting rid of the sequester, because that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about replacing it with something that would be fairly comparable in Republican terms and making it permanent. That's the real danger overall that we face right now, is that the sequester effectively is going to be made permanent through these talks. And I would just say that why is the situation particularly dangerous now? Well, even the Tea Party Republicans at this point regard Obamacare as more of an issue to bring up during the midterm elections. They're not going to try and do another government shutdown. That didn't work. And so the Republican Party is actually quite united on their position. I think that in general, the headlines that you've been seeing for months about what a mess and a shambles the Republicans are is really very overblown. They're very united on the issues. And the additional problem is, of course, is that there's a very assertive deficit hawk faction within the Democrats that's itching to do a deal with them. So we have this is the dynamic that's played out over and over again over the last 30 years. It's particularly dangerous now because you have a very aggressive group of Republicans and a group of Democrats who, on fiscal issues, identify, powerful Democrats who identify much more closely with them than with the rest of their party, or certainly with the grassroots of their party. Now, the point is that we're being set up, I think, for a very bad trade-off unless the Democratic leadership in both houses stays firm behind not giving in to the Republican demands, especially cutting Social Security and Medicare. Ryan is very upfront now that cuts in both programs, and particularly the chain CPI, is something that this talks are going to center around. The latest word from the White House is that they stand by their budget, which includes the chain CPI. So they're open to doing deals. Chris Van Hollen, who's the ranking Democrat on the House Budget Committee, is openly supportive of efforts to find some sort of grand bargain that would include entitlement reforms. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's very likely going to be a very fierce fight, and there's going to be a lot of people very determined to bring it about. So from our point of view, we need to keep an eye on where the real risks are. If there's one figure that I would leave you with today, it would be 22 million people this year are being kept out of poverty by Social Security.
AARP did a poll back then that showed that if you tell them just, you know, a very minimal amount about Social Security, their support for privatization flips and into opposition. So we just need a little bit of information out there for younger adults. You know, it would be great to see something like Social Security taught about in public schools. It is the law. It should not be framed as something that is a partisan debate that shouldn't be covered in schools, because it has been around and it has impacted lots of people. So there are a lot of strategies out there for ways to you know, frame Social Security as an intergenerational program, a family program, something that impacts younger adults immensely, and we'll be there for them.
So you know, my time check, we're getting tight, so just want to give you a heads up on timing here.
Okay, I would add to what Brooke said that while money doesn't solve everything, sometimes it is good to throw money at a problem. And part of the reason for the constant drumbeat about Social Security being somehow bad for the young is the fact that an immense amount of money has gone over the last 15 years or so into funding what I call astroturf groups that promote this idea among the young. You've had groups like Third Millennium and Kick the Can that are supposed to be these grassroots groups of millennials and Gen Xers and Gen Yers rising up against Social Security. And it's fraudulent, I think. But it's very effective in terms of getting people to think this is the case. And I would love to see the Panthers and maybe putting together some funding with other groups, funding younger people who are committed to pushing an opposite message. There need to be groups of students and younger workers who can sign on to a group that promotes the need for Social Security. And you know, raw funding is, again, it's not the answer, but it can help a lot. Just giving these people a voice, because they are out there, and again, if you look at the polls, they do understand that they face a real problem. So that's one thing that I would do, is to throw some money at the issue. The other thing is, again, it's reframing. I've been working with a group of journalists who we're hoping to put together a seminar at Columbia Journalism School on the retirement crisis. We need to focus on, we need to sort of get across the idea that there is a retirement crisis, that Social Security has a positive role to play in solving it. And that, I think, is, I think that's actually the fundamental thing that will flip the script, is if we can focus attention on the retirement crisis rather than the so-called Social Security crisis. And if we can do that, there's a natural place for younger people who are starting to think about what they're going to do after they're 65, 70, et cetera, to sort of plug in and say, well, do I have a part in this? Is there something here that concerns me?
I would just say too, you know, your shadow groups comment. We had a Students for Saving Social Security group that came out slightly, or just after ours. I think it was funded by redstate.org. I'm not sure, but yeah. So we were triple S and they were 4S.
Having a conversation with people, with young people, I thought there were a lot of good things that were put together. It was a one-page thing. Maybe you could work with the Gray Panthers so that we can have in front of us in terms of talking to young people.
Thank you. Great idea. And some of our conversation at the board meeting was how to present issues to make sure that we're presenting issues from an intergenerational point of view. Was there another question that came, or comment, or something that was important that came out of your conversations? Yes.
Okay, well, the gentleman next to me suggested that more could be said about the how you can dip into the Social Security. But what occurred to me as we're talking, especially the last, one was the matter of investing in sustainable things. I think that's brilliant. And the other thing is perhaps we could have a contest that could go out to teaching magazines and teachers nationwide for, and as a contest to for a lesson plan about Social Security. so it would have a notoriety in the teaching magazines and in the field, and perhaps stir out something in that direction.
Rick Moody, otherwise known as Harry Moody, I never know which first name, second name he goes by. I think it's Rick, right, Paul? Anyways, he does some work on this and has some reports. There's also the Association for Gerontology in Higher Education, also has lesson plans online. And if you're interested, give me your email and I can send you that information. I don't know if they've ever done a contest, but maybe that's something the Gray Panthers can approach them with.
What's the name again? What movie?
Rick Moody, or Harry. I think sometimes it's H. Rick Moody, sometimes it's Harry R. Moody.
He's at ARP now.
Yeah, I've seen H. Rick, I was just realizing. Okay, just one quick thing to that is that that's a really important, it's a really important thing to do this, and it's not just a good thing, we're engaged in a war. We have Pete Peterson, who's funding lesson plans on entitlement reform through Teachers College at Columbia University. These are going out to high schools. He's funding this stuff to go out to high schools. They have contests, they have all kinds of online slick stuff. They're doing this now. They're really out there trying to indoctrinate people, and so we absolutely have to be engaged and educating, thinking about this educational aspect, because it's literally an arms race that we're involved in that we're not winning at this point.
Okay, one last, I saw Remus's hand up first. I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but we really are going to need to keep going because we have another speaker at lunchtime. So, Remus, final.
One of my frustrations, is there seems to be very inaccurate information relayed on TV. And you get, the right is always on point, and they message the same message so often that I think most people who are watching anything on TV begin to believe it. Why can we not, and why is no one calling them on the inaccuracy of their information? Even on national news, even on the major networks, no one is coming back and saying, this is actually not true. They're literally just allowing them to, well, this is what they said today, and they're not calling them on it. Why is that not occurring, and how can we change that?
It's a really complicated question, and it would take half an hour to go into the whole thing of the National Press Corps and why it does things this way. But the quick answer is again, change the conversation. The inaccuracies get through because the whole discourse on Social Security in the national media in this city is basically set by the people who are its critics. And so they can say things that just simply get accepted as reality. One of the reasons that some of my counterparts and I are trying to do this seminar at Columbia is because we want to see if we can draw in people in the national media and get them to understand this retirement crisis frame, so that they can start to think a little bit differently, and they can start wondering why, they never hear about the impact of Social Security cuts on people, and they start to sort of question their own internal process. But that's one thing we can do, is to sort of educate the media. But again, it comes back to changing the conversation.
And Gray Panthers did have a role in calling out the media when, in particular, they were, displaying blatant ageism. And Maggie was great with that. I've seen MediaMatters.org kind of taking that role. And I think that the Gray Panthers should try to partner with them and support them in whatever way we can, and talk to them about the importance of acknowledging ageism in the media, but also the misinformation around programs like Social Security.